Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Sword Art Online Alicization anime review. This one's going to be for episode 46, which is called Alice. So yes, we begin the epilogue for the Alicization arc here. One more episode to go after this one, but this episode itself, I thought they did a really good job with the adaptation, hitting most of the key points that I wanted them to, without really, I think, skipping out too much of the book, and then there's still room to do more of it in the next episode, of course. So yeah, we completely sort of shift from where we were in the last episode because we have to have a bit of a time skip and so on. And you know, starting off, I thought it was really well done with the Alice press conference of just Wrath deciding to reveal the AIs to the world through Alice, and just revealing that, oh, they've managed to create a sort of realistic robot body of how she looked, and then it's just a matter of how do the public react to her. And so Rinko is now the sort of head of Wrath, and so she presents Alice to the world. And so, you know, you see Alice wearing their school uniform, and she specifically requested it. But you see she still has those elements of like the sort of bow while holding onto your sword type thing. And it was really fun. But then they obviously get into what this arc has been about since the beginning, which is AI and just the technology aspect of the series, and all the questions that come in about from the reporters about how can AIs be used, prove to us that she's an AI, that show us her brain. And I always really love, even from the light novel, the line from Alice about like, okay, you prove to me that you're a human, show me your brain. And it's like, if you are going to give the new AIs the respect that they deserve for being a new life form, you shouldn't ask them to reveal their inner workings in the same way you don't expect that from humans. So that's really interesting. And I especially love the cutouts just visually, to just showing all the characters at Egil's just watching this and smiling, because they all fully believe, like Kirito and Asuna do, in what that project ultimately can accomplish, that the people in the underworld are real. All of them are fully behind that, and more than anyone that we've seen in like the series, they most heavily believe in that. And so, you know, Rinko presenting everything in the exact right way about Alice showing herself to be a real person in the press conference, is such an important takeaway from all of this, given that initially the whole idea here was to create sort of AI pilots for like drones for military use. And so they're trying to get out ahead of that and change the sort of PR and opinion surrounding AIs, that no, there's basically no risk of like AIs destroying the world, taking over from humanity, unless we go after them. So once we attempt to treat them with, you know, the same rights as humans have, we should be good. And just the whole plans going forward is that no, they're not going to mass produce them, because they can't mass produce them. They have to, you know, grow and live in the same way that actual people do. And it's just getting that idea across to people who are just hearing about this idea. That's why I think the press conference scene just works so well within the context of this arc specifically. Especially like Alice saying out loud that there's a real worlder that I love. And the fact that the people in the audience hear her say this and fully, like, they believe it, that's part of why they fully get behind this in a way. Like, they really do think she is this new form of life, and that when she says that, they do honestly believe that she's in love. And I think that's the important thing here. As for, I suppose, the whole, you know, connotations of that and so on, we'll see, of course, Alice and Asuna's interactions, I suppose, in the next episode. But I always do interpret this as, like, for the most part, the Alice-Kirito dynamic is a relatively one-sided thing. That most of the time they spent together was Alice just looking after him having an impact on her and sort of changing her perspectives, and her just being inspired by him as he returns, in comparison to, say, This is the episode that literally confirms to us that Kirito and Asuna spent 200 years together as the Star King and Star Queen of the underworld. There's a huge kind of gulf in that, but the importance is getting across that she feels that way, and it being probably the biggest proof of all that the whole Project Alicization has worked, in that you have managed to create AIs to the point where they can feel love, complicated situations, and so on. And obviously there's still another arc after this, Unital Ring, which they haven't started translating them into English yet. I think it's January is when the first volume is out for that. So I'm looking forward to seeing where the story goes myself, because apart from Moon Cradle, which they show a little bit of here in terms of what Kirito and Asuna actually get up to during the 200 years, they show a quick couple of shots of basically the idea that Kirito and Asuna unite the Dark Territory and the Human Empire and try to create more of a peace and unified underworld. But like I said, the opening sequence with Alice I thought worked really well, and especially the fact, I think what probably got it across most of all that she is sort of real is her leaving on her own accord, just deciding to leave her own press conference was probably the biggest sign of like her agency, sentience as a being. It's just like, oh yeah, I gotta go, because obviously she still is kind of robotic to a degree, so obviously she set it up so that she would get like a notification if Kirito's Fluctlight became active again. And this is where the Kirito and Asuna stuff comes back in. They have been taken out of the time acceleration phase, but haven't been able to wake them up properly, because if they wake up now and they have over 200 years of life on their Fluctlights, that's a huge danger as well. And so it's a really impactful moment when Kirito wakes up, and he's so different. Like it's the same age of Kirito in the physical world, but the character speaking at that point is like 200 and 18 or whatever years old. That's the impact of this, that his voice sounds a little bit different. Some of the words he uses are different because he's been around in the underworld for 200 years, so he's seen, I suppose, the culture change there and so on. So I really like that, and just the fact that he calls Asuna Her Majesty and so on. So just getting to see finally, Star King Kirito here in action was really good, and just immediately confirming that okay, you can do it now. You can delete the 200 years that we spent in there to sort of, I suppose, reset them back to normal. And this sets up sort of one of the final scenes in this episode, which is that they do that, but Higa makes a copy of Kirito's Fluctlight before they delete the last 200 years of sort of memories. And that becomes very important going on forward. But yeah, after this point we find out that, okay, Kirito and Asuna are fine. Kirito, of course, is the one who needs a bigger recovery time, because he's been in the game for much longer than Asuna. Because, again, this goes all the way back to the start of the arc, was when he was injected, and pretty much he's been out in terms of his physical body since then, this whole time. Not to mention the damage to his Fluctlight that happened at the midway point of the arc. It just highlights how large of an arc this is, that you almost forget that, oh yeah, the reason Kirito, Asuna, is recovered almost immediately is because she's only been diving for most of a day and a couple of days after that, whereas Kirito's been under for like he says, a month, give or take. So that all worked really well. I liked seeing Asuna come to visit him, and then we get the scenes with Kikuoka. Publicly he died trying to protect the ocean turtle, but obviously he's still alive, and he faked his own death so that he wouldn't basically be actually executed for being involved in all of this. So I like this new Kikuoka that we learned about during Alicization, that he actually is, he actually works for the military and is actually really skilled and so on, and he's just so relaxed and chill about the whole thing. But it then gets into the whole idea of there's still a risk. Like, they have this plan to avoid sort of what they almost expect to happen, and that being the military is sort of like ganging up to try and take control of the technology. But by them going out ahead and basically being like, oh yeah, here's a perfect AI, that the Japanese have done the research on this, Wrath have done that research, no one's anywhere near that level. So they're hoping that just by getting across that, like, oh yeah, we've utterly owned this space of like technology, no one's going to even try to come at them again. But that's only going to work for a set amount of time, because the governments and stuff like that are the ones who own stuff like the ocean turtle, the power for the ocean turtle and so on, which is the thing that Kirito, Star King Kirito, the copy of him, feels that he has to deal with to protect the underworld. And I think this gets into that important scene, which is that we find out, okay, Higa's made the copy. He begins to communicate with this 200-plus-year-old Kirito, who is the oldest human in the world. It's this incredible event for him to get to talk to him. And just finding out that the Kirito that we have now after 200 years is someone who is absolutely devoted to the underworld. That he spent more time technically in there than in the real world. So, of course, that place more than any would be something he would want to protect above all else. And just that agreement that Kirito and Asuna made as the king and queen is that likely something like this will happen when we eventually come back around into the real world. If Asuna's the only one copied, she's just going to immediately be like, delete the copy, don't do anything with me. If they're both out there, they'll do everything they can together to work to unite both of the worlds. But if it's just Kirito, his focus wants to be on solely protecting the underworld more than anything else. And that just, I suppose, speaks to, their dynamic together, that Kirito feels they can do both together, but that he can only do one effectively on his own. And that's always going to be protect that from everyone else who may not understand, which I think, makes sense. And they get into the logistics. This is what the problem is with regards to the underworld. It's that if power gets shut down, all those underworldians are gone. They're not active anymore within the game. The light cubes just go unused. So they need to make it so that the ocean turtle remains active. It has power, and that no one tries to take it over or be overly influential with it to trying to do anything with it. They just want it to be as it is. Just the ocean turtle is where the underworld is run from, and that's it. And hopefully they can protect it from there. And the plan is to use this copy of 200-year-old Kirito, plus if they can find wherever the digital copy of Kayaba is, and what would it mean for those two beings to work together? Kayaba, who started this whole thing with SAO and the nerve gear, and Kirito, who is the biggest example of someone who has taken the Kayaba sort of philosophy of the real world and the virtual world. You can't treat them with the same level of gravitas. What if they work together on something? What could they accomplish? And so protecting the ocean turtle and the underworld, which is at this stage the most important step of technology in the world, is creating this whole other life form, which Rinko basically says the plan would be that in the future humans live together with these AIs, and that there's no discrimination between the two, and that people can start families with mixed and so on. It's a large plan into the future, and for that to happen, the underworld has to be active. It has to have a connection. And so the question is, where's that connection going to come from? How is it going to be connected to a fast enough network so that people can actually go into it? Because one of the first things that Kirito said when he woke up was that Selka, to Alice, Selka has put herself in deep freeze in the underworld and is waiting for you to return. So that's what we have to get towards in the final episode, is reconnect the ocean turtle to the point where you can actually go into the game and have the return of all of these characters in there. Because they say, Rinko actually says that the best plan to incorporate these AIs in with humans is to use the virtual world. Through people diving into the virtual world, that's where they will meet the AIs. That way it's I suppose a safer way to do it, rather than having tons of people meet Alice in her robot body, which might put her at even more risk. She's safer while in the world she was born in. And that's what we're sort of getting across here, is that there is going to be this kind of dual world thing going on, where so many of the people you know might be people who were born in the virtual world, but people from the virtual world might have lots of friends who were born in the real world, and there's meant to be this just utter duality between it is the ultimate goal, which I guess is potentially why the final arc is called Unite or Ring, is to bring the plan that started from the start, gone through everything with the Metacuboid and now Project Alicization, all the way up until, I suppose, all of the virtual worlds being united with the real world, and real people and AIs just being able to live equally in either world. That's the dream, the goal, and so on. So the setup going forward at the end, we get some important scenes here, I guess. Is just that Alice not being happy at one of these sort of meetings she has to attend, and Kirito, as he returns home, breaking down crying, remembering Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think this was an important scene to get, is that he lost the 200 years that was the time acceleration phase, but he still has all of those memories of the fact that, you know, at the midway point of the arc, he got back, you know, the memories of his like childhood with Yu-Gi-Oh! That he grew up with Yu-Gi-Oh! Because he has that sort of second childhood. So Yu-Gi-Oh's like death is still this thing that really, really hurts for Kirito, even though Yu-Gi-Oh! Was so important in a lot of the final battles in terms of giving Kirito that final push. The fact is, he's back in the real world, and if Yu-Gi-Oh! Had survived, Yu-Gi-Oh! Could be here as well in the same capacity that Alice is, but he can't be because he died. And he died in the virtual world, but it's just as real of a loss as anything else. Like to Kirito, I suppose the idea is that at this point, it would be, this is almost like the equivalent to him of like if he had lost Asuna, that this was his most important friend in a way growing up, and that loss still hurts. And so that's why it is such a nice ending for Sugaha to come into him and just want to hear Kirito's stories about how he met Yu-Gi-Oh! And just what happened with them. Why is Yu-Gi-Oh! So important to you? And just talking about it to her. And that's, you know, the role that she's going to play for Kirito to help him. And I think that was a really nice way to end the episode, with the setup, I suppose, going into I think the scene everyone is waiting for with Alice, that will be, I suppose, told in the final episode. It will be interesting to see exactly how they choose to like end it specifically. Will they do anything with regards to like teasing Moon Cradle? Because Moon Cradle is basically two of the light novels. It's like volume 18 is the last Alicization volume, but then volume 19 and 20 tell some of the stories that happened during Kirito and Asuna's time in the underworld. It's more towards the very start, so it's before they're the king and queen. It's basically like a couple of months have passed, let's deal with the first major sort of issue that comes up. It's not the most interesting story. I'd like to see it animated at some point. There's no way they're going to do it in one episode, so that would probably, I guess, be some sort of an OVA or movie style thing that they would do. That, depending on how exactly they execute the final scenes from Alicization, will be, I think, it'll be interesting to see how people feel about that with regards to how much people would want Moon Cradle adapted. I think, you know, it's 2 full volumes. I doubt they're just going to ignore it forever, given how popular SAO is. and until Unital Ring is enough of it is written to start the animation, there's an option to at least do something for SAO. And I think a lot of people would love it to be expanded, because it doesn't cover the full 200 years, and it's not the most in-depth story. But it's more time with Ronier and TS, so that's pretty good. But yeah, I think that's most of what I want to talk about in this one. I just overall was very happy with how they did this one. Again, it makes me feel sort of like disappointed, very disappointed in Mooncradle for not giving us many of the, Star King and Queen Kirito and Asuna moments, but there's such impact to the way it's showcased here. And Alice's debut in the real world, it's just, the press conference scene was really, really well done, and just in general, I think they delivered with this episode quite heavily. It's all going to be about this last episode, how well can they finish off this arc, because there's a lot of interesting scenes still left to come, and I hope they get good animation treatments going forward. But yeah, seems like next week is going to be the end of the arc, and then I suppose who knows how long it's going to be until we get more SAO in animation. But they're my thoughts on the episode in the comments. Let me know what your thoughts were, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.